Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is great to be with you this evening. We appreciate you coming and joining us for the Constitution Literacy Series event put on by the Constitution and Civility Center here at American Heritage School. We are pleased to welcome both our live audience here in the North Auditorium as well as those joining us remotely this evening. Thank you for taking the time to come and learn more about the U.S. Constitution and increasing your understanding of this amazing document. We're confident that you'll have an educational experience this evening. We'd like to begin our event with an invitation offered by Annika Southern, after which Aubrey Mason will lead us in the pledge of allegiance. Aubrey and Annika. Before I introduce the participants this evening, I would just like to remind you about the Center's first ever Constitution Bee. Learners of all ages, including adults, are invited to register for the Bee at constitutionandcivility.org. Once your pre-registration is complete, you can begin the course by watching 6 20-minute videos that address 5 important clauses in the Constitution. There are 4 different age categories, each with its own Constitution Bee course. Each course is based upon the same 6 videos, and those videos are embedded in each course. The only difference in the courses is the difficulty of quizzes that accompany each video and the difficulty of the Constitution Bee final exam at the end of the course. The older the age bracket, the more challenging the questions. The fact that all courses share the same 6 videos creates a great opportunity to learn the Constitution together as a family and to have discussions related to what you are learning. The course is designed to be completed online in the convenience of the student's home at the student's own pace. But the Constitution B final exam at the end of the course must be completed by the end of the day on Friday, April 8th, 2022. The top 5 qualifiers in each age category on the Constitution B final exam will then advance to a live, in-person, age-specific event held on Friday, April 22nd at American Heritage School. Details to come soon. In this event, the winners will be asked similar questions to the Constitution B final exam in a live, exciting competition with their peers as they compete for generous cash prizes. This is a wonderful opportunity, and we encourage you and your family to participate. Again, you can register at our website, constitutionandcivility.org. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters this evening. David Hancock is a member of the American Heritage High School faculty. Prior to joining American Heritage School in 2010, David was a practicing attorney. He is a cum laude graduate of BYU Law School and has argued dozens of constitutional issues in court. Jeff Hymas joined the American Heritage School in 2016 after working with many organizations, presenting hundreds of Constitution education lectures to live audiences across America. He holds an MBA from Idaho State University and is a magna cum laude graduate of the BYU Marriott School of Management. My name is Adam Brewer, and I joined the American Heritage faculty this year. I hold a master's degree in public administration and a doctorate degree in political science from Idaho State University. Before coming to American Heritage, I taught political science courses in higher education for 8 years. I will be serving as the moderator this evening. Tonight, we're so excited to be discussing the topic of money, something that I would assume is important to most of us here in the audience. We're going to be exploring the constitutional powers granted to our government to regulate this most precious asset. We'll first be privileged to hear from David, who will then be followed by Jeff, who will provide us some of his thoughts. Then we'll take a 5-minute break with refreshments. After the break, we'll have a moderated debate between David and Jeff for about 25 minutes, after which audience members will have an opportunity to ask questions in a Q&A session. For those of you participating remotely, I will be monitoring the chat feed on our YouTube live stream, so please feel free to ask a question, and I will do my best to include some of those in our Q&A. Let's begin by giving our first presenter, David Hancock, a round of applause.
Thank you, Adam. It's good to be here. I was a little concerned tonight. We're competing with a big event here at the school, and I was originally thinking, oh no one's going to come, but the virtual audience wouldn't have known. But it's really great to have you all here and to see so many of you here. Thank you. It's really I am excited about this subject. We're going to try to approach this a little bit differently. Jeff and I were talking about this beforehand, and we were both a little bit concerned because money is something that is seemingly very simple and yet very complex at the same time. And one of the things that we were concerned about is that we would end up going down the rabbit hole so far that nobody would know what we were talking about, most likely including ourselves. So today what we're going to try to do is we're going to start off a little bit slow, hopefully, and try to ramp everybody up to an exciting conclusion. We'll see how well those plans go. We're going to start here with some of the clauses in the United States Constitution regarding money. And these are all very important clauses that give Congress powers in order to deal with money and with monetary issues. And the first one is in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, sometimes called the Coinage Clause. And it says here that Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard and weights and measures. Seems to be a fairly innocuous clause, but it does have some misunderstanding, and I think a lot of people in just reading this, they say, well, look, right there. It says that Congress shall have power to coin money. Seems very plain, very common. What I like to do is compare this with a later clause in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 10, and here what the Constitution is doing is prohibiting certain powers to the states. And I think that this juxtaposition of article, the part in Section 8 with the part in Section 10 is really important. It says here, no state shall coin money. That seems pretty plain. In other words, the federal government is the only one that is allowed to coin money. But then it goes on and it says, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Now, the reason that I like to look at this is because this gives me a little bit of, I think, insight into what it is that the Founding Fathers were thinking of. It is very specifically prohibiting the state from doing certain actions. And in doing so, it's using very clear language. They cannot coin money. They cannot emit a bill of credit. And we'll talk a little bit in a few moments about what a bill of credit was in 1787. But they also say that they can't use anything but gold and silver as a tender in payment. Okay, so what this shows is that the Constitutional Convention knew how to specify certain things and knew how to leave other things general. And so I take from this that the grant to Congress of the power to coin money is a fairly broad grant of power. Now, you might be asking to yourself, what does coin money mean? And so what we're going to do here is, this is a favorite dictionary of ours around here, and I particularly like this when we're trying to understand the Constitution as to what it might have meant at the time that it was written, because this is the first dictionary published in America anytime close to the adoption of the United States Constitution. And what it says here is it gives a definition of the word coin. Remember, that's a verb in this sentence that we looked at before. And also it tells us generally what money is. Well, coin is to make, as in to coin words. So here we could take that verb make and substitute it, and it says that Congress shall have power to make money, or to create, to forge, to fabricate. And I think that that's an important kind of an understanding to have, is that Congress has powers to designate or decide what money is. You then go to Webster's definition of what money is, and he has a series of definitions. The first one is coin, but the second one is banknotes or bills of credit. And this is an interesting thing because banknotes or bills of credit refer to paper money. And Noah Webster, remember, was not only a lexicographer, a person who was interested in what words meant, but he also was in the Constitutional Convention. And so I think that his definitions here are particularly interesting. Now, another argument that I like to use as to how broad Congress's power is with regard to money is a clause under the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Articles of Confederation was the instrument that created a government before our U.S. Constitution. It was what we operated on from 1776 through to 1788 when the Constitution was adopted. And there were a number of things that were provided for in the Articles of Confederation. Again, what this shows is that the people at the time knew very well how to clearly specify things. And so it says there that the sole and exclusive right and power of regulating the alloy and value of coins struck by their own authority or by that of the respective states is solely in the hands of Congress. Now, the wording there, once again, is interesting. They know how to be very specific here. And here I think there's no question that they're talking about is coins. But they also have there another grant of power, that the Congress has authority to borrow money or to emit bills of credit of the United States. So again, that was a clause or a phrase that was in common usage at the time. So what did they do with these clauses? And one of the things that they did is from 1776 on, they emitted bills of credit, paper money. And what I have here is, on this slide, is two examples of colonial currency. Bills issued by the United States of America. One of them is for $0.33. I'm just wondering why we don't have coins of that denomination today. $0.33, and the other one was for $55. The $55 bill. I mean, that's really something. The other thing to keep in mind about this from a historical perspective is that every state in the United States, all 13 of them in 1787, had bills, paper money that they were issuing from their state. And so this was a very common thing that was being used, and there is nothing in the Constitution which prohibits Congress from doing this. And in fact, I think because of the language that they're using, that it's an implied grant of power. All right, well, let's go and look at some other clauses of the Constitution in order to look at this a little bit more. And here we have Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2, which is the power that has been granted to Congress to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Again, remember that the clause that was used was to emit bills of credit. That was in the Articles of Confederation, and that is what was prohibited to the states. But the federal government has been granted power to borrow. There is no limitation on the way that they can borrow that money. And shortly after the adoption of the United States Constitution, a bank was created, and the United States governments did create banknotes that were basically a way of borrowing money. In fact, if some of you want to pull out a dollar bill today and take a look at it, what you'll see is that it is called a Federal Reserve note. It is a debt instrument. And what it indicates is that the United States government, if you hold this little piece of paper, they owe you $1. Now, what is $1, you might say? Well, $1 is whatever it is that Congress says it is. And that is an important thing. All right, so now we're going to go on to another clause here. And these all work together, and they can work together to create this ability of Congress to deal with money. And so in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, we have the Commerce Clause, one that we haven't really talked about much in these debates. But it says there, Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states. Congress has that power to figure out how it is that buying and selling occur. And I think that this is a very broad power. And then what I think is probably the broadest power given to Congress occurs in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, the Necessary and Proper Clause. Now, we have talked about this before in these lectures, but the Necessary and Proper Clause is what I would call a pour-over clause or an omnibus clause, and it gives the federal government all of the implied powers or the ability to put into effect or carry into effect the things that have previously been mentioned in the Constitution. And as a result of that, they have the ability to coin money, to borrow, to regulate commerce, and to do other things that are there. And under the Necessary and Proper Clause, Supreme Court decided about 25 years after the Constitution was adopted, that the Necessary and Proper Clause allowed Congress to choose the means that are convenient. And we talked about that in a prior debate, so I'm not going to belabor it here. But the important thing here is that Congress has been granted broad powers with regard to money and with regard to regulation of both money as well as commerce. And these powers join together in order to give Congress a broad ability in order to deal with monetary issues. All right, I think we're going to stop there with me. Jeff, you're up. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, David. Yeah, as he said, the challenge with money is, sheesh, it takes days and days to get your mind around what it is, and then to talk about it and discuss it. So we're doing our best at this. We'll see how this works out. Here's the clicker. Okay. So I'm going to start with maybe an elementary look at what money is. I define it as being Any article or substance used as a medium of exchange, a measure of wealth, or means of payment. Okay? That's what money is. Okay? And what makes for good money? Well, there's these ideas, okay? Intrinsic worth. The money itself should actually have some value, have something it actually does that provides value, okay? It should be divisible, because if your money can't be divided to pay for small little things, then the money's not that good, okay? Next, portable. You should be able to carry your money with you. If you have to like hire a wagon to move your money into town to buy something, that doesn't make for very good money. It should be durable. If you have your money and someone bumps into you and it smashes, like, oh man, I just lost all my money. It should be durable, not break, okay? This is second to last is called fungible. Fungible is this big word. It just means interchangeable. That a dime is a dime, right? If you have different shells that are like, well, they're kind of close, they're kind of the same thing. No, they should be exactly the same, interchangeable. Everyone notices them as interchangeable. That makes for good money as well. And lastly, it should be relatively scarce, because if money is sand, it's just all over the place, then it doesn't really represent value or hold any wealth, because anyone can go out and get it. It's not scarce. It doesn't have that attribute. So throughout time, you guys know that, or maybe don't know, fish, shells, cows, they've been used as money. And when you look at any one of these things, fish, for example, its durability isn't that great. It's an asset for a few minutes, maybe an hour, and then it becomes a liability, so it's not good money. A shell isn't very durable. Cows, they're hard to divide, right? Once you take off just a little bit because you want to buy a chicken with it in exchange, then all of a sudden you killed your money, and your money's not, it doesn't work, right? But people have tried this, and it's practical kind of in a bartering system, but not in a real system of practicality for money. So it's elementary, but it's important. It's important to understand what money is and what the qualities that make for good money, because what happened over time, and has happened over and over in time for centuries, is people have chosen the best type of money is gold and silver, because it meets these 6 characteristics. It is and has intrinsic worth, is divisible, portable, durable, fungible, and is relatively scarce, okay? Which leads us to different types of money. This idea, there is what the commodity money, the money itself, the commodity is the money, okay? Commodity money is like gold and silver coin. It is that thing that has all those characteristics. It's the money itself. There's a second type of money, and it's called fiduciary money. Fiduciary is kind of from the Latin verb like fiel or fidel, right? This idea of being faithful to. You can take this little bill and you can turn it in because it has faithful representation of the real money. Commodity money means, prior to 1933, you could take this little guy here, and it says it's a note that can be turned in for money. On the bottom of it, you can't read it. It says $100 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. You can actually turn this thing. It's a gold certificate. That's the word I was looking for. A gold certificate. You can take it to the bank, and because it says right there on the note, the bank has to give you $100 of gold, because that's what it says. That's what it is. It's exchange for it, okay? The last type of money is what's called fiat money. A fiat is simply a government edict. We say it's worth something because it is, and we're making a law that says you must accept it as legal tender, but it's not worth anything. All it is paper, but we're going to say it's worth something. That's fiat, okay? So there's commodity money, the money itself. There's fiduciary, where you can turn something in for it, represents it. And then there's fiat, which is simply, we say so and therefore it is, okay? Now, like David and I were laughing at each other. We don't really look at each other's slides beforehand. We're like, I can't believe you're using the same 5 quotes and same clauses I do. And Adam said, well, we have to keep up tradition. That's what we do every time, right? We use each other's quotes and just interpret them differently. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, it's kind of the kingpin, in my opinion. It's pretty simple. Congress shall have power to coin money, and I actually believe that coin money means coin money, and that's it. It means coin it, okay? Commodity, like gold and silver coin. The founders had tried printing money, and they knew it was a bad idea. It didn't work. In fact, they did it to themselves. They paid their soldiers in continental dollars, and they printed it into oblivion. It was only worth like 2 cents on the dollar, like 5-6 years later. And there's a major problem with that. They realized, no, we're not going to print money. We can't do that. It's not a good idea. The second power that's in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5, is to regulate the value of that coin money, okay? And so in the first Congress, Congress got together in the Mint Act of 1792, and they decided that the value of the dollar, right, using the power here to regulate the value of their coin money, they said the value of the dollar is going to be 371.25 grains of fine Troy silver. They pegged the dollar to an asset, to a commodity, to silver itself, 371.25 grains of silver, okay? That's what they said it is. That's what a dollar is, and that's what Congress defined it to be. This little guy here is called the Spanish mill dollar. It was what was in major circulation during colonial times. it happened to have 371.25 grains of silver. And that's why Jefferson and Hamilton got together and decided, they didn't agree on many things, but they decided, okay, that's what we should peg our dollar to be, is that quantity, mass, and purity of silver is what a dollar is. The dollar is just a concept. The 371.25 grains of silver is the actual thing, okay? That's what they defined it to be. It's interesting, as you look at this, this is also called a column dollar, or a Spanish piece of 8. If you look at this column on the left-hand side, there's a little S-shaped ribbon that goes across it. It's kind of funny because that looks like our dollar sign. That's kind of the origins of where we got our dollar sign. So this last part, they also can fix the value of foreign coin, which is what they did. Any time a foreign coin came in, if it had, 740 grains of silver, they'd say, well, that's worth $2. Or when they coined their own money and it had 371.25 grains of silver and they stamped Washington's face on it, they say that's worth $1. Okay, it was pegged to the asset itself, to the value of the money itself. All right. And as David did, I'm going to juxtapose this against Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. And it says clearly there that no state shall coin money. As he said, there was a lot of paper money and coin money in all the states, and Congress got together and said, that's a bad idea. We don't want to have all these different currencies floating around and all the manipulation of currencies. So let's not allow states to coin money. So quick pop quiz. Who gets to coin money? Congress, right? It says that. Who can't coin money? The states. Why? Because it says that. Okay? Pretty simple stuff. The next one is emit bills of credit. Before we go on to talk a little bit about that, I want to define what that is and give you an example. When you emit a bill of credit, Dave's already told us that's basically printing money. Let's say you have a bar of gold, okay? $100 worth of a bar of gold, and you go and you deposit it into a bank, and they give you a bill of credit. They say, hey, look, this shows, and it says $100 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. It shows that I have that on credit in the bank, and I can walk around with that. I can trade with people. They trade with me. But anyone who has that can go into the bank and hand it to them, and they say, yep, here's your bar of gold, because it says on this piece of paper that you have what's there. You're on credit. That's how you emit bills of credit. And the reason the founders said we don't want that to happen at the state level is because the temptation is just too great. And I have quotes from Washington and Jefferson and Madison and even Hamilton who said that's a bad idea. That's not. Now Hamilton later changed his mind, and people are allowed to change their minds, right? But emitting bills of credit is a bad idea because it's just too tempting to do it. To say, I know there's really only $100 of gold in there, but everyone knows that 60% of the population doesn't ever come in and get their gold. So why don't we just print innocently 3 other $100 bills, and it'll stimulate our economy? That's a great idea, right? Let's just do that. The problem is, then those things, when let's say all 4 just happenstance go to get their gold at the same time, what's going to happen? The bank has no other choice but to cut that bar into 4 pieces and give them out a quarter. So the purchasing value of their paper money no longer equates to the 100, it equates to the 25. And that's the idea of inflation. That's the idea of the problem of emitting bills of credit. Okay? And they said, let's not do that. Okay? So it's clear the state can't do that. What about Congress? Can Congress do that? You already heard Dave's interpretation of whether Congress can do that or not. I turn to the 10th Amendment on this. I say, look, it clearly says the powers that are not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. Powers like the power to print paper money. If it's not given, it's not there, which goes back to previous debates we've had about the necessary and proper clause and the general welfare clause, et cetera, right? The powers that are not delegated to the United States, like the power to print paper money, and he goes on to say, nor prohibited by it to the states, and in this case, the power to print paper money is prohibited by it to the states. Those powers are reserved to the states when they're not prohibited, in this case they are, or to the people. So can people emit bills of credit? Yeah, if I want to sell my car and I just simply write IOU, trust me, I'll pay you in a little while. If you want to do that, that's fine. I think that's crazy, but you can do that, okay? So then what happens when people just start trading a bunch of bills like the Jeff Hymas bill or the Dave Hancock bill, and just all kinds of crazy economy happening, people just emitting bills of credit because they can. People can do that. Well, what happens there is the last part of Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. It says, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender and payment of debts. At this time, the U.S. federal government was not collecting money from the people. They'd only collect money from states, and people would pay their money to the states. Okay, the state was the intermediary. And so what would happen is when they would have to go time to pay their taxes, they could only pay to the state government in gold and silver coin. And so they could mess around all they wanted to with these paper notes, but when they went to pay for their debts, to pay their taxes, they had to convert it over into gold and silver. And what would happen to the fraudulent Jeff Hymas who's throwing out a bunch of paper money and doesn't have anything backed by it? Everyone would realize he's fraudulent, don't take his money. And it is a built-in system to make sure that paper money isn't a fraudulent prevalence of fraudulence with it because they know they're going to have to turn it in for gold and silver at the end. That's the built-in system of Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. Okay? David pointed out this too. Article 9 of the Articles of Confederation talked about Congress shall have power to borrow money on the credit of the United States, and he pointed out, and I'll point out as well, that in the debate, well, sorry, I skipped ahead here. Borrow money means borrow money. It doesn't mean print money. It doesn't mean borrow paper money. It means borrow money, okay? Now, this is the part I was referring to. In the original Articles of Confederation, it said to borrow money and or to emit bills on the credit of the United States. And they actually had a vote on that, and they voted 9-2 to strike that out. They said, no, we're not going to allow Congress to emit bills of credit, okay? So they intentionally did not put any emit bills of credit. They voted to get it out, and then we have the 10th Amendment that clears it up. If we didn't give them the power, they don't have it. It's reserved to the states. Oh, it's not given to them either. Okay, it's reserved to the people. That's what the 10th Amendment's clear about. Okay, it's good. It's all fine and dandy. The problem is we've been printing money since the very beginning. In fact, the founders themselves, like I said, printed a bunch of money to try to pay for their soldiers. Thought maybe we should do this, and they themselves said that's a bad idea. Let's ensconce in the Constitution the prohibition on printing paper money. Let's not allow that to happen. Federal Reserve Act of 1913 comes along. It's not the first time we printed paper money. We did it many times, but it's kind of the big monster in my opinion. This is an act to provide for the establishment of Federal Reserve banks to furnish an elastic currency. Elastic meaning it can expand and contract. Congress gave them a power that they don't have in the first place to print paper money. It wasn't the first time, right? When the Federal Reserve notes first came out, they had to compete with the other gold certificates. They had to compete with the other money that was out there that you could actually take and turn in for gold and silver. They had to compete with it. And so you could turn in Federal Reserve notes for gold and silver. But after a few years, people started to trust the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve told the world, don't worry, we're going to back ours by gold. We promise you can take it to the bank because it's as good as gold. And we made the Federal Reserve note the world currency. And as you may or may not know, in 1933, well, let me go to the last slide here. It's good news for you. It's the last one. Greshams Law says that bad money drives out good money. If I'm going to pay for something and I have a choice to use a gold coin or a piece of paper that says it's worth that gold coin, we're not really sure, though, because they printed a whole bunch of them. What am I going to pay you with? I'm going to pay you with the paper, and I'm going to keep my gold coin in my pocket or under my bed, right? What happens is bad money drives out good money. There is no circulation of good money anymore. And what people are doing in the 1930s and before is Americans are realizing, they keep printing a bunch of money. I'm going to keep my gold under my mattress. And FDR came out with an executive order and said, you can't do that. That's anti-American. You're hoarding gold. You have to give your money back to us. And you give it to us, we'll pay you $20.63 for the ounce of gold that we give you. And then once we think we've collected everything, oh, and by the way, if you don't turn it in, we're going to charge you a $10,000 fine for doing so, for keeping it, and we're getting caught with it. And after about 9 months or so, we're going to now say, oh, by the way, all that gold that we now have in our treasury is worth $30 or $35. Made a couple cool billion off of it. Now, because you're hoarding it, right? Because you're taking the gold and saying, I'm going to keep my gold because my gold keeps its value, and the paper can't, because the paper can just be printed and printed and printed to where you have so much paper against this gold, and you come up with the idea of inflation. That's where we find ourselves today. The bottom line is both sound logic and constitutional clauses support these truths about money. One, money represents wealth in property, whether labor or real property or whatever it may be. Government's job is to protect property, according to the Constitution, according to, we hope, common American sense, right? Paper is not money, it's a representation of money. 4, when government increases the paper money supply, they are confiscating wealth. Because they're essentially saying, it used to be that your money was equal to this, and now we printed a whole bunch of money against that, and now it's worth like a quarter of what it was because we just printed 4 bills against it. And we're allowed to because we have the Federal Reserve Act. We can print whatever we want to. Government is constitutionally mandated to protect, not confiscate its citizens' wealth. Some people would argue that we're the most wealthy country on the face of earth, and I would say, yeah, that's probably not too different than saying, I'm just a teacher, and I own a condo in the Bahamas, and I own my own cruise ship. Never mind that I have a $16 million credit card debt, but look at how rich I am. Look what I have. Like, yeah, you do have that. I'm not arguing that you don't have that. But what I am arguing, that's not the definition of wealth or rich. That's the definition of a broken system that's based on the idea of being able to print paper money ad nauseum, which gets us in the problem we're in. So, we're going to take a break right now, right? Okay, take a break, enjoy some of the snacks out there, and we'll come back and debate this further.
Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone back from the break. Let's do a round of applause to get those in the lobby back here into the auditorium. Thank you. Welcome back. So I think we have a lot that we can discuss based upon what Jeff and David have given us this evening. Now that we have this constitutional framework by which we can understand the topic of money and the role that government plays and has played in regulating that, I think most of the audience, myself included, would love to hear how this framework and your philosophical differences on it can be applied to some of the most pressing topics of our time regarding money, including rising national debt, rising interest rates, and rising inflation, most notably gas prices. Let's begin with rising national debt. In January of this year, the public debt of the United States hovered around $30 trillion. And that is approximately $8 trillion more than where our national debt was in 2019 in December, pre-pandemic, when the national debt hovered around $22 trillion. And I say only, but I guess with quotations, right? What is the audience supposed to understand about the constitutionality of this government use of money, or our public funds? Is this type of spending supported by your interpretation of the Constitution? David, we'll start with you.
You know, it seems like I always get the hardest question first, right? But, you know, I think it's important to kind of divide these into two different issues, and I think that they are two separate issues. And the first issue is it constitutional? And the second issue is it a good policy? And I think that those are two different things, and it's important to keep it that way. And what I would say is, yes, it's constitutional. I think there's no question about it. The Constitution of the United States gives Congress the power to borrow money and to spend money. And they can do that so long as it's in the general welfare of the United States and if it's necessary and proper. And so those three clauses come together in order to give Congress that power. And the bigger question is it wise, or is our Congress doing the right thing with regard to borrowing that much money? Now, if you ask 100 economists an opinion on something, you're going to get 150 different opinions, which is really kind of a strange thing about economics. It's supposed to be a science, but it's just really, really wild, I think. But many economists think that this amount of debt is okay, and that we can bear it as a nation. And other economists say, no, it's too much. We need to pull it back. You know, nations are different than households in the way that they borrow money. Alexander Hamilton understood that. And he understood that borrowing on the credit of the United States, as it says in the Constitution, requires that the country, the United States, has a line of credit. How do you get a line of credit? You borrow money. And that's the only way you can get it. If you don't borrow money, you have no credit worthiness and you have no credit. So yeah, I think that it is constitutional. And even though that number is almost impossible and difficult to imagine, $30 trillion, when you just line those zeros up and look at them, it is an enormous amount of money. But it is constitutional.
Jeff?
Yes, I mean, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2 says the Congress of the United States shall have the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. That's true. So you throw out all these terms. Maybe you've heard them in the news or you know, in the Fox Business or whatever. M1 or M2 or quantitative easing, all these things, monetizing the debt. My argument would be that to borrow money is clearly constitutional, but to do all the other things that have got us into the financial mess we are in, which M1, M2, M3, quantitative, all that stuff is, it's really... in my simple mind, and I know it's not this simple, but it's just simply printing money. And you can't print money. So the $30 trillion of debt we have isn't just, in my view, just borrowing problems, which we both agree is, well, I don't know if you necessarily agree, but we'd say that maybe it's not the best situation in terms of where we're at borrowing-wise. I would say borrowing is only half the equation. There's all the other things that happen as well, the printing of money, the buying back of T-bills, all these different things that are happening in the economy that are enabled and solely enabled because there's an ability to print money. And so that, and in my mind, that's clearly unconstitutional, whereas borrowing is clearly constitutional. It has to be done in wisdom, and I don't think it's being done wisely at all. the problem of the major portion of our debt isn't just the borrowing, it's the printing of money, which you have all these economic terms to explain it, but that's the biggest challenge. And that's clearly unconstitutional to print money, because it's only to coin money, and there's a reason behind it, the things we talked about already, or I talked about already in my presentation. But that's where I see the major issue being, and therefore, I don't think that part of it, when you talk about national debt, the major, in my view, the major funding of that national debt comes from the whole problem of everything that surrounds this corrupt idea of printing paper money.
Now, in your presentation, Jeff, you talked about the idea of money as an asset or money as property, right? And so when Congress uses their constitutional authority to raise the debt ceiling, right? So each time we get close to that debt amount, they have to raise the debt ceiling so that we don't default on our loan and basically put investors in a bad situation, right? And so with that consideration in mind, what are there any provisions, existent in our constitutional system that somehow put a limitation on Congress to take on new national debt or to print money that can kind of bring that under control?
Yeah, so I'd answer that very simply, that they can borrow money, they can raise the debt ceiling, and they can't print money, period. The real issue, though, when we have to raise our debt ceiling is, in my view, is the spending issue, is we're spending too much. Fiscally, we're spending way too much, and it goes back to the interpretation of the Necessary and Proper Clause, the General Welfare Clause, that we are doing all kinds of things that, in my view, in my interpretation of the restrictive nature, the limited nature of the Necessary and Proper Clause and the General Welfare Clause, it should keep us focused on fiscal responsibility and small spending and small budgets. The problem is those are out of control, and so we go to the very constitutional. They can lift the debt ceiling if they want to. They can continue to borrow money if they want to, but that's not going to solve it. Raising the debt ceiling and borrowing more money is not going to solve it. What's going to solve it is turning off the spigot, and with proper interpretation and application of the Commerce Clause too, but the General Welfare Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause. So I would say the real answer to our financial issues, the money issues, when we're talking about debt ceiling raising and all this stuff and borrowing, et cetera, isn't that area. Just like in a regular household budget, your issue is how do I get more credit cards? Your issue is how do I stop spending so I don't have to keep getting more credit cards? And I don't think it's that much different in a simplistic view for America.
So David, just to clarify, so you suggested that it's a difference between constitutionality and bad policy. What is your I guess rebuttal to Jeff's point, specifically in terms of raising money and what he has referenced as or his argument about a household and how government should actually be run like a household in terms of debt?
I think that if we were every household, I think, borrows money at one point or another. And it's necessary, and I think that debt is something that is necessary. Having a line of credit is necessary. And the government of the United States also needs to have that line of credit. And you look at two situations, both of which resulted in the United States creating a central bank. The Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. Under both of those circumstances, the United States didn't have an effective way to borrow money. And as a result of that, they were hampered in their ability to fight those wars. And I think that in both of those historical circumstances, it's really a good example of why it is that governments need to be able to borrow money. And one of the questions that Jeff, I think, has done a very good job of addressing, but I don't know that I have as well, is what is money? And I really like Jeff's the definition that he gave, that it's a repository of value. But value of what? And I would say gold is not money. Gold is gold. And silver is not money. Silver is silver. And if we take them and we put them into a little round and we stamp a face on them, it doesn't create money. What it's doing is basically saying this represents some other kind of value. And so there's nothing magical to me about gold or silver that make it in any way superior to any other thing that represents value. All of these things are just intermediaries of exchange. They're just a way to make it convenient for people to do business. Jeff talked about that. You can't cut off part of your cow and go down and trade it with somebody for something else. And so what you need to do is instead have some medium of exchange. And what that medium of exchange is really fairly irrelevant as long as people have faith and trust in it. There's a little phrase I like to use. I say that money is faith, trust, and pixie dust. Money doesn't really exist. It's an idea. And so to me, I have no problem with the United States saying, yeah, we need to borrow some money. So we're going to print some bills and we're going to say this is worth $1. And to me, as long as we all collectively agree that it's worth $1, it is worth $1.
So Jeff made the point, because I think you make an interesting point, David. Jeff made the point in his presentation about the notion of scarcity. So Jeff, how would you respond to to David's argument that basically paper money that we use is basically as valuable as gold or silver in terms of the fact that it's a medium of exchange that we give value to, right? And because money, as you suggested, isn't as scarce as gold and silver because it can be printed, paper money can be printed, at any point. Is that? Are you seeing, or are you suggesting that what we're seeing now happen in the United States is basically what is your critique of David's point at play?
Well, I think what he said is what I was saying, that it doesn't really matter what you choose for your money, what you want to use as the emblem of the trading and value of store of wealth. Is it paper or is it gold or silver? It doesn't matter, except that the founders of our country wrote into our Constitution that we've made the choice to be is gold and silver. And so you can't just say, well, yeah, gold and silver is good, but so is paper. Well, if it is, then amend the Constitution and say that we can print paper money. If it's not, if without that, you can't just say we're going to use paper money because we feel like it. If you think it's a great monetary strategy and fiscal strategy to print more paper money, get that into circulation, build our economy to the point where we're leveraging ourselves in high amounts in debt, I think that's a legitimate idea. I think it's something that should be debated in Congress. It should be something we choose to amend the Constitution, say, no, never mind, we're not going to do gold and silver, we're going to do paper. And so we're going to do paper, and then everyone gets to pipe in and say whether that's a good idea or not, and they vote, and they say, oh, we're doing paper, and we amend the Constitution, and 3/4 of the states say, yep, let's do it, then great, that's what you do. But until then, you don't just say paper's a better idea and we're going to do it. Because it's not just paper, it's paper that I think it's fair to say represents, or it does not represent real value. It's being gold and silver. We started out commodity money, we went to fiduciary money, and then we said, well, we probably get away with fiat money, let's do that. And all we did was just do that. And Congress said, yeah, let's do that. No, you can't just do that. That's against the Constitution. If you want to do it, change the Constitution and let's do it. I would fight vehemently against it. I'd be way against that because I think that's a bad idea. I think it's a bad idea to allow money to just be multiplied and created and inflated because then it devalues the power. It empowers government to manipulate markets and to devalue your money without even realizing it. And instead of saying, oh, we're gonna spend money on this war or we're gonna spend money on this program, do you guys want it? Should we raise your taxes? And we're like, no. Like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll just inflate the money supply and you don't even realize it. Like, I'm so happy. My taxes haven't gone on forever. But we're able to pay for all this stuff. Like, well, that's great. That's cool. I'm sure government loves that. And do politicians love that? Of course. Because everything's great. They're getting all kinds of cool things and no one has to pay taxes and they keep getting reelected. And everyone's like 20% positive rating of Congress and yet 80% get reelected every year. It's because we're just like, everything's going good. Why would I not reelect the guy?
Right. So in other words, as a trade-off, you're saying that we don't pay higher taxes, but our money is less valuable.
Right. It's an invisible. Is it John? No, it wasn't John Maynard Keynes. It was Alan Greenspan said that inflation essentially allows people to get robbed blind without realizing it. It's something to that effect. There's a quote in there somewhere about that.
Excellent. We'll be getting to rising inflation here in a second. First, I wanted to move on to rising interest rates, which I'm sure many people have seen in the news lately. Basic economics would tell us that when interest rates are on the rise, both businesses and consumers will naturally cut back on spending due to the increased cost of borrowing. This will cause earnings to decline and stock prices to drop as well. On the flip side, when interest rates have decreased significantly, consumers and businesses will increase spending, causing stock prices to rise. This is basic supply and demand economics. We know that the Federal Reserve, which has been discussed already, a government agency, sets the interest rates and have recently started raising those rates. what are your thoughts on the constitutionality of a government agency, which was created in 1917, as Jeff pointed out, not beholden to the public, essentially being in control of our marketplace in such a drastic way? What do you think the audience should understand this? We'll start with Jeff.
I'm going to get to the I think I addressed the constitutionality of that in the last couple slides. I want to just address the logic. The way a bank works is they go out and they say, hey, we'll pay deposit rates. We'll pay you 5% if you give us your money. We'll pay you 5%. Oh, good, we got your money. Now I'm going to give it out to this person at 7%, someone who needs a loan, because they're pretty sure they can make money on it. And I lend it to them at 7%. I make the difference. I make the 2%. That's what a bank does. That's how they work. They offer as low a deposit rate as possible to entice people to give them money, and then they try to get as much out as they can of the interest rate of the loan interest. And they keep that money. And that's how it's always worked until you start to introduce a central bank, until you introduce something like the Federal Reserve. And they say, actually, banks, don't worry, you don't have to go try to entice people with a 5% deposit rate. You can just get your money from us. That's what a Federal Reserve is. That's what a central bank is. It's the bank's bank. And they go to them and say, well, how much do you have to pay for the money? And they say, how about 1%? Why would the Federal Reserve offer them money at 1%? Because all I have to do is print it. It doesn't cost them anything. I'll give you money at 1%. And they're like, oh, cool. Wait, if I only have to pay 1% for my money instead of 5% to my money to the depositors, I'm paying 1% for my money. I can offer a 3% loan interest rate, and I can still make my 2%. I could probably even offer a 4% because they're used to paying 7, and I'm offering 4. And everyone's happy, and everyone's like, great, I'm going to take out a loan. I'm going to take it out. And the economy just takes off, and everyone goes crazy. Well, yeah, but it's all based on a paper money idea. It's all based on the cost of money coming off the printing machine. The Federal Reserve is just happy as larks that they're billionaires because they're printing money. They've been given monopoly power over the money supply. The Federal Reserve is by mandate, by fiat, the recognized currency, and they can just print whatever they want to at a very low rate. And banks love it too because they can get a lot more loans because they can offer at a lower rate to entice people, and they make the same amount, if not more, on the spread. And that, did I answer your question?
So you start, go ahead.
In terms of interest rates.
Yes.
Interest rates are natural. And interest rates happen in a real world. They slow down or speed up or go higher or lower depending on, oh, no one's going to give me their money for 5%. Well, I better give it to them for 6%. And then what happens? They give it to me, and then I can't. I have to make 2% in order to meet my payroll, so I have to offer to 8% to the loans. And it goes. And what happens? The economy slows. People are like, no, I want to move up. So natural supply and demand, like you explain better than I do, it goes up and down, and that's fine. Until you get the Federal Reserve comes in and say, hey, we don't want up and down. We want to own the market. And they get in there, and they insert themselves in the market. And what happens to inflation? What happens? Everything just skyrockets. If you look at the maps, the inflation and the real value of money, even though the economy is growing, it's on a bubble, and it gets popped. And it gets popped often. And what's unfortunate is the Federal Reserve is the one who gets to make that choice. And in 1929 or so, they contracted the money supply. They raised the interest rates, and it caused the Great Depression. And centralized management of the interest rate never works, because centralization is a few people who think they're smarter than the rest of the world trying to tell people what to do instead of letting the rest of the world decide it, and it goes up and down by nature, and it corrects itself naturally. So, but that didn't really address the constitutional side, except that it's not constitutional of the Federal Reserve. How's that?
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. David?
The Federal Reserve, I think, is absolutely constitutional. Constitution says that Congress has the power to coin money, to regulate the value of money, to regulate commerce. And, I know that my view of the necessary and proper clause is a little more expansive, a lot more expansive than Jeff's. But it's one of those things that it's hard for me to look at that and say, no, they can't have a central bank. And the Supreme Court fairly early on said, yeah, you're right. They can have a central bank. And central banks are important. And with modern economic theory, central banks have a vital role to play. And the Great Depression was arguably caused by the Federal Reserve by some people, but other people say, no, it was caused by the fiscal policy of Congress. Other people say, no, it was really caused by individuals who were irresponsibly speculating and overextended themselves. And so what was the cause of the Great Depression is something a lot of people argue about. But I think that we can say with fairly good confidence that the economy, since the creation of the Federal Reserve, has largely been much more positive than negative. You look at the boom-bust cycle. So what happens naturally is interest rates go up, people stop buying, they have real financial difficulties, the whole market crashes, you go down into this deep valley. And then you climb out of that valley and you rise up again, and this is called the boom and bust cycle. And what the Federal Reserve does is, by trying to control the money supply, expanding and contracting the money supply, it is to even out those booms and busts and to try to have it as a steady trajectory on an upward fashion. And you look at history over the last 90 years, and it has done that. It has been this fairly expansive economy, and we have become quite economically well off. And I think that's true regardless of how you measure that and whether you look at how you look at debt and anything else. We have done quite well. And I think that is in large part because of the Federal Reserve and the idea of currency being elastic. I know Jeff doesn't like that, but I think the elasticity of money is very important. And when you go back and look at historical examples, some of the reasons why we had paper money is because there just isn't enough gold and silver. And it cannot contract and expand. And the only way to deal with that is through inflation. And that's where you can get some really bad crushing inflation, or what I think is worse, deflation.
Can I respond to the booms and busts? I mean, if you look at 1913 is when the Federal Reserve Act comes along, okay, and they insert this idea of kind of cheap paper money. Well, then you have what the 20s, what are they called? The roaring 20s, right? That's your, wow, this is great. Like, we have this paper money machine and everyone's going crazy and people are investing unwisely. Why? Because you can buy on margin. You can buy a stock worth $100 for $10, and just a few months later you can sell it for 110, and you make this huge profit, and you're able to just pay a little bit on the side to just cover that transaction. There's some crazy stuff going on in the roaring 20s, right? And it's encouraged because the Federal Reserve exists, because you can just buy on margin because it's just paper money. And what happens after one of the biggest booms we have the Great Depression, right? So I would say, wait, you mean when the Federal Reserve came into existence in 1913, it helped level out the booms and busts? I think it went crazy in the 20s and it went abysmally low in the 30s. What about 2008? What about 2001? What about all these booms and busts that we have that are horrible, that are killing our economy? I would say it depends on which map you're looking at or which graph you're looking at. I mean, we say 100 economists give you 150 different viewpoints. If you get 100 statisticians, and you get 1,000 different interpretations of their maps, right? Or what they're showing is happening over the long trends, et cetera. But my response to the boom and bust is I don't know that it's helped us. I think let's just put it think. I think that the Federal Reserve has been very much involved in getting bigger and more powerful and stronger and more rich on the idea of controlling those interest rates, controlling the economy with their power, that I think is unfortunate.
Something that I think is important, though, is the Federal Reserve came about because we were in a depression. And the boom and bust cycle was much more dramatic before the Federal Reserve came into. We had a depression about every 20 years, and sometimes much more frequently. So we have the Gilded Age in the 1890s, right after a depression and leading into another depression. And so we think about the Great Depression as being this horrible time because of its length. And there's a lot of arguments as to about why it was extended so long. But we haven't had a depression since then. But before the Federal Reserve was created, we had depressions regularly. And the contraction of the economy over extended periods of time is devastating, especially when we start to have deflationary cycles. And that's where things get cheaper over time. Because deflation is actually, I think, is way worse than inflation as a devastating attack on money and a devastating attack on wealth. And so I think the Federal Reserve really has done us very well and hasn't in any way harmed our country.
Can I jump in? This is a debate. The idea that so what I view here is, like I talked about in my presentation, in 1933, FDR had the incentive, because all the gold is being hoarded. He said, you selfish Americans, we're going to take your gold and we're going to replace it with Federal Reserve notes. My simplistic view on that is the reason we have a major depression is because through the process of the Federal Reserve and inserting money, Federal Reserve notes, paper money into the system, it no longer had to react to reality. There was no longer, and they could simply say, gold is no longer the bearing, and if we ever come to a place where we might have a recession or depression, what do? We print more money. keep it afloat, right? What happened when we had problems with COVID-19? We printed more money. What happened when we had problems with any? We just print more money. And we say, well, look, see, that helps it not go up and down. Like, we could have had a major, and I agree, we could have had a major nosedive through COVID-19, but luckily we had paper money to solve it for us, right? And all of us get our big returns, and we get our stimulus checks. We're like, man, for a second I thought I'd have to suffer. This is awesome. I'm just getting all this money coming back, and that's why there's no ups and downs, because 1933, after the Great Depression, we're able to get a position where we can use paper money to essentially paper over the problems and make it so you don't have to have the booms and busts.
I think that, though, is fiscal policy, the spending of Congress, not necessarily the borrowing or the Federal Reserve printing money. And this is something that I think is important for us to understand, is most of the money that's created in our world today isn't actually created by the Federal Reserve. It's created by banks, private banks. And it is possible because of paper money, or what's mostly used today, just imaginary digital money. Numbers on a balance sheet. There actually isn't any physical cash in order to back it up. But the 1933, the gold is pulled, but that was partly because there just wasn't enough gold. There was not. And you look at the way that the United States government was at the time, the value of gold to silver was about 15 ounces of silver was equal to 1 ounce of gold. And that was established by law. And that's a real problem, because gold and silver are two different commodities which float separate from each other. And what happens is, when you get an imbalance, talk about bad money driving out good money, you have people trying to take gold because it's worth more than the silver, or vice versa. And that's why it was pulled out, is because there just was an insufficient amount of gold, an insufficient amount of silver. And so we got off of those standards because they were creating real problems with this imbalance. You look today, gold is about 80 times the value of silver on the market where it's traded openly. And that kind of imbalance, if it had held in place, who knows what kind of devastation that would have caused on our economy and our markets. So I think that's one where the Federal Reserve and Congress were very wise in saying, hey, we're getting rid of that. We're going to go to a different thing where we're only looking at one thing. We're looking at the dollar. And it's something that is elastic. We can increase it or decrease it, but we're only looking at one thing instead of trying to peg the dollar to something else, which is pegged to something else. And all three of those things are fluctuating, and they're always going to be out of balance.
Yeah, I want to respond to that, but I'm going to restrain myself for two reasons. First of all, David's smarter than me, and I'm going to get myself stuck like, oh man, I looked dumb, I shouldn't have said that. Secondly, because at this point, I think we're getting into the weeds where it'd be really cool to discuss this more, but I don't agree, but that's all right. But I'm not dumb enough to try to disagree to the point where I expose my ignorance. I'll stop right there.
Okay, well, let's move on to inflation more specifically, because I think both of you addressed, or have at least loosely addressed this issue of inflation. So, David, you seem to think that at least moderate levels of inflation are good, from what I understand. And Jeff, you seem to think that inflation, as you suggested, is really just another form of government theft. So, currently, the annual inflation rate in the United States accelerated to almost 8% just last month, the highest since February of 1982. And of course, those rates were well above market forecast, or the market forecasts that were given previously, with soaring energy costs, labor shortages, and supply disruptions. Energy has remained the biggest contributor of this increase, with a 29.3% increase at the end of the last year, and gasoline prices surging also at about 50% in December, of course, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. For food, we've seen a 7% increase. Used cars and trucks, a 40% increase. So all over the map. Although inflation is a market phenomenon with many variables contributing to it, government policy is one of those variables. My question for both of you is, what is the role of government, including President Biden and Congress, in deterring this elevated increase in inflation? Is this a good or a bad thing? Is increased spending in government COVID-19 policies mainly to blame for these elevated increases? David, we'll start with you.
Oh, really great questions, I think, and difficult to answer just because I think they're complex. I do believe that inflation is, or small or moderate amounts of inflation are good. I think that they are actually good for the economy. As long as inflation is below 3%, I think that that's something that's good. You start getting down below 0.5% of inflation and I think it becomes bad. I think that government has a significant role to play in trying to manage inflation. Now, I say trying because there are natural forces at work. And so you look at things that are beyond the control of Congress. You look at the war in Ukraine and between Russia and Ukraine right now. That is something that's beyond the role of Congress. You look at the COVID pandemic. To some degree, that was beyond the role of or the ability of Congress to predict or to plan for. But Congress does have an ability to react to it. Now, I think personally that Congress reacted badly. I think they spent way too much money, and I think that's why we're seeing inflation, or partly why we're seeing inflation, is because in an effort to try to protect us all, they made some poor decisions. And you can't shield everyone from everything, and I think Congress tried to do that. And as a result of that, they've created some of the inflation that we're experiencing today. I think some of the inflation is also natural. After this kind of an event, people spent less, they were out less. Pent-up demand has built up, and people want to now go out and get those things that they weren't able to get 2 years ago because they weren't going to go anywhere or do anything. And so I think that there's a lot of forces at work here, but I think that one of the things that Congress can do, and that the Federal Reserve as one of Congress's agent can do, is to try to control inflation by enacting responsible monetary policy and responsible fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the way that Congress spends money, and monetary policy has to do with how much money is out there. And the Federal Reserve can expand that amount of money, the money supply, and they can contract it through various mechanisms that they have. But I think they have a really significant role to play in that. And whether they've done that role well I think is a different question. And I think that they have had some real missteps in the last 2 years. But overall, I think that they do have a significant role to play.
Jeff?
Yeah, I had a thought. Dave gave me a softball when we were having a little conversation before this a couple days ago. He said, one of the things that I do agree with Jeff is this idea that, man, when money gets so complex, it's like, well, don't worry, it goes in this little black box and it comes out, and like everyone's like, okay, I don't know what happened, but there's money there. I think I get nervous about that. The monetary policy, the fiscal policy, the role of the Federal Reserve, the role of the Treasury, the role of all these things, all these different moving parts, and all of them are government-centered and government-empowered. It creates a point where the people are just kind of like, hope this works out. I hope the people in the ivory tower know how to do this, because I don't feel like I have any control over the economy or any control over money. That's the challenge I think is involved there. So inflation is normal. I think it's natural for things to kind of go up and down. I shouldn't say inflation is normal. I think we have to get our terms clear too. What is inflation? For me, inflation is not a rise in prices. And inflation is an increase in the money supply, which results in a rise in prices. You pump more money in, and now milk doesn't cost $2.50. Milk costs $3 because there's more paper money that actual product has to go and grab, has to equate to, because there's a bunch more poured in. And if you inflate the money supply, then prices go up, not the other way around. Prices don't just go up. They go up because there's a bunch of money in the system. And I don't have a problem at all with the economy kind of lurching and striving and succeeding and failing a little bit here and there. And I think that'd be much less pronounced. And people start to be wise with their choices because they see the consequence of their actions, rather than the government saying, we're going to control this. Don't worry. We'll make decisions for you. And if the economy on a macro level, big level, ever kind of fails, we'll just pump a bunch of money in there and kind of solve it. Yeah, that's inflation. And yeah, prices go up. But hey, you're pretty happy, aren't you? I mean, we're pretty prosperous, aren't we? You don't mind too much, do you? And I think that's the problem. I think I'm repeating myself at this point, but yeah.
Excellent. Any other thoughts on before we move on?
Yeah, I was going to pick up on one thing that Jeff said, and that is, what is inflation? And I think that is something that inflation is that things cost more tomorrow than they cost today. And I don't think that they are directly connected to the money supply. The money supply can influence inflation. But inflation is caused by a lot of things, including the fact that something might be scarcer today than it was yesterday. So if I'm a wheat farmer and I have 100 acres of wheat and a tornado comes through and wipes out all of my neighbor's wheat, but not mine, my wheat is now worth more. And there's overall less wheat, and so wheat as a whole is worth more. And that's inflation. The money supply hasn't changed. It's the supply of wheat that has changed. And so I'm just going to take a little bit of exception with Jeff on talking about money supply is what causes inflation. Money supply, I think, can be a cause of inflation, but it's not the only cause of inflation. There's a lot of natural things that impact inflation.
Right, and perhaps a good example of that is when a natural disaster hits a
Yeah.
particular area, you see prices inflate on various goods, and then usually those prices go down, but are a result of that natural disaster.
Right, and over time, as the relative value of certain things changes, certain things go up in value and other things remain at value. So my first computer I remember I bought, it was just a really sweet computer. It had a 512K RAM in it and a 5 1/4 inch floppy drive. It was just really the cat's meow. And it cost me almost $2,000 for that thing, and it was really great. I can buy a computer that's like 10,000 times better than that today for far less money, real money. And that was, 35 years ago that I bought that. And so the value of computers have dropped significantly. Why? Because they're just so much more available and they're cheaper to make. And I think that's a good thing. It's not that the value or the price of computers have gone up, and that's also not deflation. It's that the cost of producing those things has changed. And this is why economics is just so confusing. It makes my head spin. As soon as I think I understand it, everything changes, and I go, no, not quite yet. And it's like trying to grab light in the dark. But I think that's an example of how inflation works. Milk goes up. Why? For a lot of reasons. Partly because there's not as many dairy farmers out there. Partly because the cost of people who run dairy farmers has changed. Partly because of the cost of equipment. There's lots of different things that go into that.
Yeah, and I would argue those natural disasters, natural market forces I agree. That's inflation does happen, right? What I'm saying is I don't want the increase in the money supply to cause that inflation of the prices to go up and down. We already have enough to deal with. Let's let it be dealt on reality instead of on the guy behind the curtains pulling the strings trying to make the economy work how they want to, and it happens to be the government who can use that in very wrong ways that take away our wealth from us. But, yeah.
Very good. This has been an excellent debate. Let's go ahead and give our debaters a round of applause. We want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. However, before we do that, we want to give a little snapshot of what to expect in our next meeting on April 15th at 7 p.m. There's a famous court case known as Kelo versus New London of Connecticut about a woman that lost her home to the town of New London, who basically took her home and sold it to a private developer. She took her case to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court ruled in favor of the city and basically suggested that the city's actions were totally constitutional. David, can you give us a snapshot of what to expect in our meeting next month?
I have no problem with that at all. It is something that I think is very constitutional. In fact, I spent a lot of my career being the guy that took the house. And so that is the kind of thing that I did. My grandfather would probably be very unhappy with me on this, but I believe that government has the power to take our property for public use, and what public use is decided by the government. It is decided by what the people as a whole decide public use is. Now, they do have to pay for it. They can't just take it and not give you value back, but the question is what is required by the United States Constitution? And the United States Constitution simply requires that any property taken for public use be paid for with just compensation. Not just compensation, but just compensation. That's an important distinction to make. So I think that the Kelo case it's an interesting case, but I think that it did get the Constitution right.
How would you punch back, Jeff?
Surprisingly,
what can we expect from you?
I actually disagree on this. I don't think you should take little grandmas home and give it to private developers to create a strip mall. Because the Fifth Amendment says no person shall be deprived of property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. I see the four things there: deprivation of property. Can you be deprived of property? You may own the property, but if they tell you what you can do with it, do you really own it? No. Secondly, public use. How in the world is that public use? Like that's a strip mall for private developers. And the footnote to that story is the developers never actually developed the strip mall. They took the little lady's house and they thought, oh, never mind, that's not a good investment. And they didn't do it. Can you imagine? Like, wait a second. Okay, just compensation, can that be manipulated by government? Sure, because they can say, well, we're paying you this much. Well, yeah, but my home's been in my family for 30 generations. And here's your check. I'm going to wipe it out. I don't care. Right? And then so deprivation of property, just comes, due process of law. Yeah, there has to be law. There has to be a system through which you go. And I think that system can be corrupted. So yeah, it'll be fun. We'll take the gloves off like we always do next week or next month and talk about property rights.
Okay, thank you both. Now you know what to expect for next month's meeting at 7 p.m. on April 15th. Now we'll go ahead and open it up for questions from our live audience. I'll also be monitoring the chat feed remotely. So we invite audience members. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A to line up here over at the microphone. Make sure to speak clearly into the microphone, and we'll go ahead and begin here with our first question.
First, thank you. It's been wonderful tonight to hear perspectives. Just first, one thing. I just finished reading a wonderful book called The Lords of Easy Money from Christopher Leonard. I absolutely recommend it. It talks about the Fed's actions from 2010 to 22 and what they've done, and it would challenge some thinking. So, but my question, though, is in the rise of digital currencies and Bitcoin. And what I saw today, Congress shall have power to coin money, but the state shall not. So we have a private enterprise developing these cryptocurrencies. Congress has power to regulate them. This is completely unregulated now. I would just love to hear your thoughts, either side, on the constitutionality of digital currency, Bitcoin, and where we're going.
Thank you.
I'll take a first stab at that one. We were kind of hoping that somebody would ask about cryptocurrency.
I was.
Adam has already got several people he's been texting to ask about cryptocurrency. So, cryptocurrency is something it's a brave new world. And if any of you have read Aldous Huxley's novel, you know that that's a dangerous place to be in. It is really the Wild West with cryptocurrency. I think there's no question Congress has the ability to regulate it. And by regulating it, that means that if they wish, they can prohibit it. They could kill it, in the United States at least. And there's a lot of other things. So what should they do? Should they treat it like a stock or a bond, a private offering? That would be more in the realm of the SEC that would do that. Are the people who own cryptocurrency driving the price of it up artificially in order to make a killing? And some of that has happened, and there are people that have been accused of issuing reports on how they're going to take cryptocurrency just to inflate their portfolio. And there's a lot of things about the cryptocurrency which are a little bit unsavory and shady. And so I think that there's no question that Congress can regulate it. I think a bigger question, and perhaps maybe a more pressing question, is could Congress create their own cryptocurrency? And I think that is something that, President Biden, was it 4 days ago or 5 days ago?
Only like I think it was only 2 or 3 days ago. Issued that executive order. Yeah.
He issued an executive order of all federal departments to examine the impact of cryptocurrency and creating a federal cryptocurrency. And I think that if the United States Congress wanted to do that, that they have the power to do that. I think that they could create that. I think that it would be a horrible mistake for Congress to do that, because I think what cryptocurrency has accelerated and gained in value for certain reasons. And I think that the Federal Reserve creating a cryptocurrency takes all of the bad reasons and all of the disadvantages of this kind of thing and puts them together. So I don't think it takes any of the good things from either system, either from centralized banking or from cryptocurrencies. I think it takes the bad of both worlds and puts them together.
But how would you respond to the argument, David, that essentially the dollar is already a digital currency? I mean, so many transactions and numbers upon numbers are done digitally over computers, right? And so cash is as a medium of exchange is being used less and less. And so is the notion of a U.S.-backed digital currency such a bad idea?
And I think the way that I would respond to that is the dollar does have backing. It has the full faith and credit of the United States behind it, which actually means a lot. You look at the assets of the United States of America. I'm just talking about the government. That's a lot of assets. I mean, the Federal Reserve itself has a balance sheet with over $9 trillion of assets on it. And so the dollar does have backing to it. But the problem with cryptocurrency, or some would say the advantage of cryptocurrency, is that there is absolutely nothing backing it. It is truly just faith, trust, and pixie dust. Whereas with the federal dollar, you actually have things that are behind it. And so what I think is if Congress was to create some kind of a cryptocurrency that wasn't backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, that takes the worst parts of fiat money without the better parts. In other words, having some kind of financial backing, the government that is backing that. And we do have a digital currency, you're right, but it's not the kind of digital currency that can be exchanged and traded the way that cryptocurrencies are. I would argue they have value because they're decentralized. Once you centralize them, I don't think they have value. And is it any different than our dollar? I don't know that it is. So I guess I just talked myself in a circle and said I don't really know what to think about that.
I wasn't going to say that. Jeff was going to say
Jeff was waiting to pounce.
No, I was like, whoa, I'm lost again. What I think cryptocurrency, in my view, that the real power and the real substance behind cryptocurrency has everything to do with blockchain technology. Cryptocurrency, as I understand it in my simplistic mind, is simply this currency that no one can inflate because of the technology, the blockchain, the algorithms. No one can break that code, and so people are like, I like that type of currency because no big no big centralized government or entity can change and devalue my currency by pumping in the system. The blockchain is covered. The algorithm is unbreakable, and therefore I'm going to invest in this not because I can turn it in for real assets like the $9 trillion on the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve, but because the Federal Reserve can't mess with it, because centralized governments can't change it, because I'm trading with other people that I can trust their currency, and my currency isn't going to manipulate it, and I'm not going to lose purchasing power of this currency. And so I agree, and I think David and I are more or less saying the same thing in different ways, and maybe we're not, I don't know. But yeah, to have centralized control over cryptocurrency kills the whole idea behind cryptocurrency, because to me the real value of cryptocurrency is that you cannot inflate it. You cannot increase more crypto because you can't break the algorithm. You can't break the blockchain, therefore you can't manipulate the supply, the money supply. And that's, if all of a sudden you turn that over to the federal government, like, oh, cool. I think the federal government is very, to be cynical about this, I think the federal government is very, very nervous about it because they're getting a competitor who says, hey, we'll offer you a currency that no one can inflate. Like, oh, get them out of the market. We need to keep the currency that we can inflate. We want to be in charge of that. We don't want to allow cryptocurrency in there. They're gonna compete with us and make us look stupid and reveal that we're printing your money into oblivion. We can't have that. Because I think they have every reason to do it and to fear it, and I think they'll try to. And I think I hope they don't win. I hope they don't succeed. I don't think that would be a good thing for money. I would say it's not in their role to do so, because what they're doing is they violated the Constitution by doing all the things they're doing, and they're saying, wow, here's kind of a pseudo-constitutional money system that can't be inflated. Well, then they should. How about we just let the market play out and see which one works? I know which one will work. The one that won't be inflated. That's the one that'll work, and that's what people are saying. So don't get in there and say, hold on, we want to inflate this. Like, no, get the heck out of it and let the system work.
Yeah, and I think just if I may add a few clarifying points as well. I think many cryptocurrencies have scarcity, and so like the dollar, that's what gives them value, is the fact that whatever cryptocurrency they're essentially are offering this currency, and there's a limited or finite amount of it that will be out in the marketplace, and so that incentivizes investors and others to buy into that currency, and because of that scarcity.
Yeah, and no one can go in and change the code and say, oh, never mind, there's 3,000 Bitcoins instead of 2,000 like we said there'd be.
Right, and kind of going along with that as another clarifying point, you mentioned blockchain technology, right? So basically what that is when data is retrieved from transactions, that data is placed in what's called a block. And then that block is attached to previous blocks or previous block of transactions in a linear fashion, which makes it very difficult for hackers or other parties to actually take that data and misuse it for malicious purposes, right? And so that's what gives that that faith or backing to cryptocurrency is the fact that it's relatively secure in comparison to the U.S. dollar.
And the cynic in me would say that one of the reasons that it's popular is because it's untraceable, which what I mentioned, the kind of the shadiness about it is that there are people that are saying that, oh, cryptocurrency is being used for nefarious purposes. So you hear a lot of talk about how the Russian oligarchs, what they've done is they've taken a lot of their assets and they've put them in cryptocurrency. So if you're out there trading Bitcoin, you may be funding Russian oligarchs, or you may be funding a drug cartel, or you may be funding some other kind of criminal enterprise. And what the United States government wants to do is to be able to trace those money transactions back to the bad actors. And so I think that's what I mean by saying you're taking some of the worst characteristics of both things. You're taking the anonymity of cryptocurrency and you're eliminating it, and that's, I think, it gives it value. And you're pairing it with something without any backing behind it, which just makes it a pure fiat money, which I think makes it worthless. I don't think it would work for the United States to do it because I just don't think that that there would be any excitement to it. But on the scarcity issue, some of the cryptocurrencies actually have built in a planned in acceleration of the number of coins that they are available. And just to go to Jeff's point earlier, just notice that Bitcoin is a coin. Doesn't exist, but it's still a coin.
Do we have any other questions from audience members that you'd like to ask while we have these two incredibly intelligent men here on the stage? Another question here. Go ahead.
Hey, so kind of like going back to like, I guess like what is money and like how we should have currencies, whether like gold or silver or paper, and how the government uses our money. Inflation has kind of been a little crazy lately, right? And our country is in severe debt. And it kind of feels like the government doesn't really have any accountability in terms of how they're using their money because there's just no system to limit them, really. And they're using like our tax dollars for like really kind of dumb things. And I was wondering if you guys kind of think there should maybe be a system of what the government can use money for and what it can't. Because this is going to sound really silly, but there was this thing that I found that my brother found online and showed me of this list of these things that the government had spent money on that were really ridiculous. One of them was this really weird experiment on how cocaine affects pigeons, and they used billions of dollars on it. It's like, you can't use our tax dollars for that. Like, that's ridiculous. So what do you guys think in terms of limiting systems to keep stuff like that from happening? If that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I would answer that as the system is called the Constitution, and the clauses that limit that would be called the Interstate Commerce Clause, the General Welfare Clause, and the Necessary and Proper Clause. I think my viewpoint of that would simply say, yeah, that's very clear, that for necessary and proper, for instance, Congress shall have power to make laws that shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. Is there a foregoing power to do studies on cocaine reactions in pigeons? No. Or anything related to it? No. So therefore, you can't do it. Not open it in necessary and proper, whatever Congress thinks. If Congress thinks that's important, they can do it. I disagree with that, and I say clearly the text of the Constitution says you can't. Because I think you've identified what I would say, Elizabeth, is the issue, is the idea that it's our spending problems. It's that we're spending all kinds of money, and therefore we have to kind of like print a bunch more to fund all this stuff. And I'd say the system is built in. That's the strict conservative, I guess, interpretation of the Constitution would say, yeah, that's what the system does. It's called the Constitution. It stops the government from doing stuff like that.
So as a clarifying question, Jeff, because that's not actually what's happening in reality, would you be in favor of like a constitutional amendment that provides clarification of the necessary and proper clause, or that somehow puts limitations on the level of national debt that Congress can get us into?
That's a tough question. I'm not sure I'm interested in an amendment. I think that's the proper way, but I don't think that's the best way, because I think it's just putting a Band-Aid. I think the best way is education. I think the best way is to teach people the truth, help them understand principles of limited government, live those, stand for those, elect those who are sent to stand for those things in Congress. That's the only long-term solution. To just amend the Constitution, I think, it's, in my mind, it's already written clearly. So if you amend it to be written clearly again, they'll still find a way to get around it and say, well, this is our interpretation, and the Supreme Court supports our interpretation, therefore we can do it. So why waste time amending it? Why not just turn around and teach the people, help them understand principles, help them understand what that means, and help them just think logically in terms of locally in your own family, what do you have to do? Do you just go off and, do you have limits? Do you have rules? Do you have that type of thing? I think the real answer is to educate and on the original intent of the Constitution, well, at least my interpretation of the original intent of the Constitution, in order to solve those spending problems.
Good.
Unsurprisingly, I completely disagree with Jeff on this. You know, I think the Constitution is clear, and I think that it says is that Congress gets to decide what it's going to tax and spend for the general welfare of the people, and that it gets to borrow money. And so I think that it does get to borrow things, and if it decides that conducting experiments on pigeons is in the general welfare, I guess that we need to think about our congressional members and whether they're doing the work for us. But I do think that a constitutional amendment, if we really are concerned about debt, and we really are concerned that Congress is spending more money than we have, I do think that we should look at a constitutional amendment. And but I think the difficulty is the American people don't. And you may remember, some of you who are my age or older, that there was an attempt to pass a balanced budget amendment to basically require that Congress pay for everything that they spend by looking at revenue. A lot of states have that kind of a requirement in their constitution, including the state of Utah, and they couldn't get it through. There was just not enough Congress members that would vote for it in order to get it out, and there has not been sufficient number of states that are willing to go to any kind of convention in order to raise this constitutional issue otherwise. And so what I think this shows is that the American people are satisfied with the way things are. And when it says we the people, I think that's what it means. We the people get to decide this. And I can disagree with the policy of doing that, but I think that ultimately it is our representatives who make those decisions.
Thank you both. We have another question here in our live audience.
So if the government has the right to take property for eminent domain, how do they justly compensate for those people who bought their property as an investment or as property that grows in value over time?
Do you want to save this for next time?
Yeah,
or answer it
that's
now?
a really great question. I love that question. I'd like to really answer that question, but we could wait. I don't know.
So you've got a great question teaser for next time. Yeah,
You going to come back next month?
We're going to go into that, Olivia, a ton next time, and I think in order to give a good answer, we'd have to give the background behind it to give that good answer. But I think that's a great question. It's a really good question.
Thank you. We have another question here in our live audience.
So I know you said we mainly use paper money, but in the Constitution you said that Congress can coin money. When I think of coin money, I think they turn gold and silver into coins. I know you said Mr. Hancock said there's not enough, so they use paper, but would it be better to use coin?
Good question.
Thank you.
It is really a great question. How much gold is out there? That's a really question. There's a finite amount of gold. 244,000 metric tons, I think, is the amount that is estimated to be out there, and only about 187,000 metric tons have actually been mined. So we're limited in how much we can have. And the question is, what's the value of that based off of all the currencies and all of just the United States? Let's not even worry about other countries. Let's just talk about the United States. And there's just not enough. There's not enough to have the United States holding all that gold in a vault somewhere, and although it wouldn't have to be that big of a vault. It's actually kind of amazing how big it is. It's only about the size of a swimming pool, an Olympic swimming pool. But you have to hold all that in a vault. You don't do anything with it, which means that we wouldn't be able to have golden wedding rings. We wouldn't be able to have gold watches. We wouldn't be able to have golden tickets. we wouldn't be able to have any of those gold things because all the gold would be put back underground to be saved, and it would really cause problems for us. So our electronics industry is highly dependent on gold right now. And I think that's one of the things to go back to the start, circle back to the start. In the 1870s or 1770s, there weren't a lot of uses for gold. Jewelry and money, and that was it. Today, we have a lot of uses of gold. Every one of you probably have a little bit of gold in your pocket because it's in your cell phone.
This is where I get conceptually, I think I'm on the right track, but sometimes I'm not sure. But in let's say the turn of the century, 1900, what did you need to have a really, really nice night on the town, really, really nice dinner, really, really nice hotel stay, really, really nice suit, really, really nice limo ride, okay? Let's say you needed an ounce of gold. To have that same really, really nice experience today, what do you need? An ounce of gold. The ounce of gold back then is worth $1, let's say. The ounce of gold today is worth it's like $1,900.
2,000 today.
2,000 today? Really? So what I'm trying to explain is the idea that you don't need 2,000 more times the amount of gold to cover the 2,000 Federal Reserve notes. You just need the little ounce. And that ounce will take care of all the need. To say there's, in my mind, to say there's not enough gold, I think there is. There isn't if you start to say, well, if you compare it to the inflated amount that it is. But what if you just say the gold equals, and the market would do that. The market would say, this amount of gold is what equals to this thing. I shouldn't have opened my mouth. I've got my own self confused. But the idea is there is enough gold. And it could be in coin, but you've been to other countries. I've been in Ecuador. You can have a coin, smaller, bigger coins that have smaller, bigger pieces of gold in it. And that gold itself that's really right there really is value, or the coin itself is gold, or the coin itself is gold. But we're not even mentioning silver. Silver could also, I mean, the dollar is actually pegged originally to silver, and there's tons of silver out there. I think that those things could still happen. It's just a matter of value ratio of value of the ounces to the thing. And I don't think I explained that very well, but anyway.
Well, I found it very interesting. In fact, when we were talking about this issue a couple days ago, we were kind of debating whether or not gold and silver or cryptocurrency, how good of an investment strategy those are. But we're not going to go down that. We're going to go down that path. But
we'd have to give an SEC disclaimer if we were
right. But I think it's on the minds. People are certainly thinking about gold and silver as a potential asset to invest in, or cryptocurrency. And so I think all of these issues, and I really appreciate both of you doing such an excellent job in terms of applying the framework today and the constitutional powers given to Congress and how they apply to these really big issues. And I think the audience as well is appreciative of that. Since we have no other questions, let's go ahead and give our presenters another round of applause. We're grateful to those who joined us this evening in our live audience and remotely. Thank you so much for your participation. We'd like to highlight the amazing work of Kimberly Heath in setting up for our evening tonight. We also like to thank our AHS school administrators, Jay Clark and his team on the technology, and others who assisted in making tonight possible. You already know what to expect coming up on April 15th, our next meeting. We encourage you to invite friends and neighbors to watch previous sessions, and for other resources, make sure to visit constitutionandcivility.org. We hope to see you next time. Thank you again, and good night.
I just now got to go. It's done.